Real Talk is proudly sponsored by Huawei and MTN.
Well, good evening to you and a warm welcome to Real Talk right here on SABC 3. I'm your host, Azania Mosaka. Tonight we bring you an episode filled with motivation and heartwarming stories as I sit down with some of South Africa's most powerful and resilient individuals who are not confined by their disabilities. The lines are open to you right through the show, so we welcome your questions and your comments. My first guest has a motto that she lives by: born without arms, not without attitude, and she's got lots of it. It just perfectly encapsulates her fearlessness and, of course, how she continues to touch lives through her work as a clinical psychologist. She has over 14 years of experience and has become an internationally recognized inspirational speaker. With that, it's a pleasure to welcome you, Nikki Abdinor. Welcome to Real Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
You know, I've watched your talks, I've watched your videos, and all of it is just so infused with a wicked sense of humor. Where do you get this sense of humor?
I think you have to have a sense of humor. I think with any kind of challenges, if you can't laugh at yourself and laugh at the world, then you are going to be miserable. So luckily, having no arms brings about lots of humorous experiences, and all my friends on Facebook always say, you have such a different approach to life in laughing at the funny things that happen to you.
Yes. What's happened to you over the years that you just found yourself reflecting on and just couldn't help but laughing?
Well, the last time I went to Europe for a conference, I was phoned up to say that we never got your fingerprints. So that was a little bit complicated.
Yes, yes.
But things like that happen all the time, and you just have to have a sense of humor about it, because otherwise, as I said, you're always going to focus on the things that you don't have.
And that's important because, as you say, your motto is all about just doing everything with loads of attitude.
For sure.
Is that what drives you?
I think so. I'm very much a believer in focusing on our strengths. So from positive psychology, they say don't ignore what is wrong, but focus more on what is right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important, because I'm not ignoring the things that I can't do, but I've chosen to focus on the things that I can do.
Yes, yes. So let's talk about your disability. When you were born, you didn't really get an explanation, from what I understand, about what happened.
No, it was quite a shock for my parents. You might notice from a few wrinkles that I might have that when I was born, my parents didn't get a scan to find out if I was a boy or a girl, or let alone if I'd have all my limbs.
Yeah.
So it was a huge shock for them that I was born without arms and shortened legs. But I always say that fortunately for me, my parents chose to focus on what I can do.
Yeah.
So it was never the case of, can Nikki do this? It was always going to be, well, how can Nikki do this?
And that, I guess, opened up the world then for you.
For sure. I don't even know that I realized I had no arms growing up.
Really?
Because I just learned to do things differently. So many people ask me, how did you learn to use your feet? And it's exactly the same question I can ask you.
Yeah.
How did you learn to use your hands?
Yeah.
We just learn to use what's available to us.
In fact, we actually have a video that captures what you go through, or how you go through the day. So let's play that. So we can see what your daily experience is like.
I recognize that when people meet me, they may have many questions about how I manage everyday tasks. I mean, it's not every day that you get to meet an armless psychologist. Well, I type with my toes and I text with my tongue. Growing up, I had to consider each part of my day from a solutions-focused perspective. I cannot do everything myself, and I recognize that if I focused on the long list of things that I can't do, including a handstand, I could be depressed. Much like positive psychology, I don't believe that we should ignore what is wrong, but focus more on what is right.
That's incredibly powerful. Have you had or battled with anxiety and depression?
Not myself, but funny enough, that is the way I got introduced to psychology, is that I had a friend in high school who suffered from depression and anxiety. And for me, growing up, I know that I always had to overcome physical challenges to be independent. And I remember at 17 years old, it was such a profound moment for me to recognize that some people have hidden disabilities and they can impact on our lives even greater than a physical disability. So I could so strongly recognize how we were both struggling with challenges, but just in different ways. And that's what motivated me to study clinical psychology.
So what do you think of the world's outlook then, or view on the question of ability? Because as you say, that many of us walk through this world with different disabilities, and yet we have a society that just confines it often to the physical.
Yes, well, the interesting thing is that absolutely every one of us has a disability. It's just that often we don't see what they are. And I often
also,
say...
some are hidden and some...
Yes, for sure. So sometimes our disability is that we're really grumpy on a Monday morning and we can't handle the fact that the taxi cut in front of us.
Yeah.
But to recognize for ourselves that when you understand what your disabilities are, then you're at such an advantage. So I often say that I was an advantage being born without arms, because from the start, I knew exactly what my challenges would be. But many of us go through life not really understanding what hidden disabilities we have.
Yeah.
And that's why depression and anxiety, it's so rife nowadays, because people aren't understanding what's wrong. They don't know how to explain it. You look at me and you know that there are certain things that I can't do. I do want to change perceptions of what I can do, but it's to recognize that a lot of us stay silent about these disabilities, and we don't realize if we find ways to compensate, we can actually live such positive lives.
Yeah, yeah. But what's the role of your family been? The level of support that they've provided you. In fact, tonight you're here with your mom.
Yeah. Well, my family has been pivotal, and I think that that's where I've also been at such an advantage. I, strongly believe in nature versus nurture. I think luckily, nature, I was born with a spirit to do whatever I set my mind to, and with nurture, I was in a very positive environment where I was treated like everybody else. I went to mainstream schooling when inclusive education wasn't the norm.
Yeah.
And I think that that made it so much easier for me to get through the world because I had that support structure. And many people with disabilities living in South Africa don't have those things.
Yes, that's absolutely true, because you've been fortunate to have such a supportive family.
Yes.
But one of the things that when we look around, the environment is built for physically abled people. And we still have such a long way to go in ensuring that we provide access. And it's not just about a ramp, it's not just about the disabled parking bay at a mall.
Although those are really nice.
We should keep those. We should keep those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I believe strongly in universal access, and which is designed for all.
Yes.
So we don't need a special entrance for people with disabilities with a ramp, that everybody can manage to use a ramp. And I love that technology and innovation is happening where we're looking at self-driving cars, where it's not only a person without arms or a visual impairment it is going to absolutely love stepping into a self-driving car, but everybody wants to do that. So it's about innovation for everyone and recognizing that everyday innovation is actually helping every single person, but people with disabilities too.
You're taking me back to a small little discovery about the history of the ramp, what they call the curb cut.
Yes.
The ramp at the end of a block on the pavement, how it joins the road. And initially, of course, it was created to accommodate people in wheelchairs, but ultimately the broader society benefited. Mothers pushing their strollers, someone maybe who's pushing a trolley or luggage. So it is universal access, ends up benefiting broader society, even in ways that we might not recognize initially.
For sure. And that's the thing, is that if we recognize it, when you build a new building, when you're designing a car, when you're looking at WhatsApp features, think about people on all different levels. Everybody wants their lives to be easier nowadays. They're so lazy. They've got arms, but they don't want to use them. But it's my advantage completely.
Yeah. Well, we've got a caller for you.
Okay.
Yeah, someone's on the line. We've got Vuyo calling from Potchefstroom. Good evening, Vuyo.
Hello, how are you?
We're very good. Welcome to Real Talk.
Very good, man. It's so nice to see this beautiful woman. She is looking absolutely amazing, and I see such a beautiful creature of God. Like, God is amazing. You can actually see that through her, in her. She is just a beautiful nature of what God can actually create in a human being. Because if you look at her and the fact that she doesn't have arms and she is smiling, my goodness. She is a beautiful creature, and we love you, Nikki. And I am so motivated sitting here and looking at you and everything that you say.
Wow.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Well done. Well
Thank
done.
you for your
And
call.
I'm so grateful to God for your family, because I think that's one structure, or that's one support system that's carried you through this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for your great call. Thank you so, so much. And you do these motivational talks.
Yes.
What is the ultimate message?
Well, the ultimate message is to recognize that we live in a world of absolute uncertainty. So as a practicing psychologist, I'm dealing with that every day, one-on-one, is that we desperately want to know exactly what's going to happen in our futures. And we're so anxious about not knowing.
To control. We want to control everything.
And the reality is that everything that's going to happen in the future, everything that we're worried about, is completely out of our control, because we don't have a crystal ball to know exactly what's going to happen. So it's recognizing the importance of tolerating uncertainty and to teach people to believe in themselves again. I think we live in a world where we're comparing ourselves to others all the time.
Messages, you're not enough likes.
For sure.
You're not enough.
And yes, and social media has made that so much harder. So I feel that that's very important. And my key message as well is to practice gratitude, to recognize that happy people aren't necessarily the people that have everything. It's people who are grateful for what they have.
Yeah, so their lives aren't perfect, but just
Yes.
grateful for everything.
Yes.
Well, Nikki, you're still here. You're still here. And Nikki's not leaving just as yet, so do keep those calls coming. And she's commended as being a credible agent of hope, whether connecting with her on a one-on-one basis or as part of an audience. More with Nikki's journey after the break.
Let's clear the air by answering some frequently asked questions. No, your eyes do not deceive you. I'm just over 1 meter tall and I have no arms. So I do share your obvious first thoughts. Thank goodness they didn't give me a handheld mic. I'm grateful that the statue of the Venus de Milo proved to the world that a woman without arms can be stunningly beautiful. But like most of you, I find her to be quite an attention seeker not wearing a shirt.
Oh, I think she's going to have a comedy career one of these days. That was a video from one of her inspirational talks that took place in Cape Town. We're still with clinical psychologist and inspirational speaker Nikki Abdenor, and she's still here as we wrap up our conversation with her. And I want to remind you to give us a call if you have a question or a comment. Gosh, Nikki, I'm sure you have a comedian sitting somewhere at the back helping you to refine.
It's on my bucket list to do a stand-up.
Really? Really?
You got to break the ice though first, because when people see you straight away on stage, I think they're still absorbing your physical appearance. So that's why I've learned to do a few jokes for people to realize that I'm approachable. And I think that's what I use humor for, is I realize that people make assumptions about you looking at you for the first time. And if you smile and you crack a joke, you make something light of it, it makes it a lot easier for people to understand and connect to you.
Yes, because you know what it's like. I'm sure you see it all the time. You probably wonder, what are they thinking? What are the questions that are going through their heads? So you take that first step.
Yes, and I always believe in having a different approach to things. So one thing I'm really accepting of is that wherever I go, people do stare at me. But then I use my psychology on myself, and I think to myself, well, isn't this what Beyonce deals with every day of her life?
Bravo to that. Bravo to that. So you speak internationally, you speak globally. And of course, there's this powerful message where you share your life story through your talks. And you use that funding towards your own initiative, Nikki's Drive, your NGO.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Well, first of all, I drive a car completely hands-free, and this car was donated to me many years ago from somebody in England with a very similar disability to mine. And because of the incredible gift of driving, what it's given to me in my independence and mobility, I desperately wanted to start a non-profit that could fund car adaptions for other people with disabilities in South Africa.
Yes.
So it kind of happened twofold in that when I started with the non-profit, I realized one of the greatest struggles that non-profits have, especially in South Africa, is gaining funds. So I thought, well, what is a way for me to raise funds for this organization? And then I thought to myself, well, you know, sometimes people ask me to do a talk, so why don't I get into corporate talking, speak at conferences and events, and then a portion of that fee can be donated to Nikki's Drive. And how funny it is that now I find myself being a professional speaker, being fortunate to travel the world and to be able to help other people through Nikki's Drive.
So what is this technology that you provide them with, or is it customized depending on the person's
Yes, I think that's the one thing to recognize with disabilities is that they are so unique and different. And I always believe anyone with a disability wanting to learn to drive, your first step has to be to see an occupational therapist to do a driving assessment and find out exactly what your needs are. So technology totally translated to freedom for me. My car is specially adapted from the UK, and at the moment the technology that I use to drive is still not available in South Africa. So Nikki's Drive, we've decided to focus on local adaptations. So a lot of the people that we support are people with physical limitations from below the waist that need hand controls. And fortunately, there are a few companies in South Africa that do them themselves.
Yes.
So it becomes a little bit more cost effective. But at the same time, it's a huge expense for a person with a disability, especially someone newly injured who's got so many other expenses. It just becomes an extra help to getting them back to work, back to living their lives in their families and in the community.
Because for a person with disabilities, being able to be mobile, to access mobility, it's a sense of freedom, isn't it?
For sure. And I think that that's one of the greatest barriers that we have for the employment of people with disabilities is that there isn't always accessible transport and reliable transport. So you find that a lot of people with disabilities aren't working or sitting at home, and one of their greatest barriers is that transportation.
Yeah, yeah. So being able to access these opportunities then, being free to means accessing opportunities, having
For
mobility.
sure.
So how do we support you? Just book you for a talk?
Yes, book me.
So that more people can have this freedom.
For sure, and I'd love people to share the video that I have online of me driving my car, because I think it opens up people's perspectives on what is possible. And a lot of people with disabilities think that they can't drive. There are a lot of things that they think they can't do. I remember many years ago having a therapy client who was newly injured, a quadriplegic, and he saw me texting with my tongue. And he actually said, I'd never even thought about that. And his wife came to me the next day and said, my husband made sure that I put the phone down and he was testing if he could text with his tongue too.
Yeah.
So it's just about opening up your eyes to what other ways we can use parts of our body to be independent.
And like you said, problem solve.
Yes.
How? It's in the how, not can't.
For
but
sure.
It's in the how can we? Nikki, you've broken the ice. You've broken the ice to tonight's show in a phenomenal way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow. Well, that was Nikki Abdinor, clinical psychologist. Well, up next, our guest says that he moves through this world as a black queer feminist thinker as he pursues his fiercest dreams. He's certainly one of my inspirations. Edun Dopu is here and will be joining us after the break. You're still watching Real Talk right here on SABC3. The stage is yours. My guest has been recognized as one of the world's top 30 thinkers under 30 and one of the 50 most powerful disabled people on the planet. Oh, and did I mention that he is the only African person with a disability to graduate from Oxford University. Edun Dopu is here with us on Real Talk. My friend Eddie.
I am so thrilled to be here.
You don't know how thrilled I am.
Thank you for having me.
You're an
I
absolute
am delighted.
inspiration, Eddie.
Oh, thank you, Azza. I'm so grateful to be here.
You know, for a lot of people that might not be familiar with your story, I want us to go back so that they fully understand the journey that you've traveled. The doctors had said to your parents that you're not going to be able to live beyond the age of 5.
Imagine that.
And you defied it.
I defied my prognosis, and I will be 28 years old at the end of this year. So I have outlived myself by 23 years. The doctors predicted that I wouldn't live beyond the age of 5, diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at the age of 2, which is a motor neuron condition. So it results in progressive weakness. So the older I get, the weaker I become. And here I am on the couch with you.
I know.
In my chair. But
in your chair, on Real Talk.
On Real Talk. So yeah.
Because Nikki talked about attitude.
Yeah.
How important has that been for you over the years?
It has been everything. It's not just attitude. I think it is a worldview. It's a philosophy. It's an outlook to life. And my disability has been the greatest experience of my life, because it has allowed me to reimagine what it means to be a human being moving through space and time.
And you often share these thoughts, which leave an audience in absolute awe. Like Nikki was saying, that so many of us are harboring and dealing with our own disabilities.
Right.
And then to see someone so empowered living with a disability really does help the rest of us to also look around and see the beauty of humanity.
Right. And you know what? Disability is part and parcel of the human condition.
Yeah.
And so my job is to ensure that when we think about disability, we don't just think about deprivation, about neglect, about isolation, but we can celebrate disability. We can think about genius. We can think about possibility. We can think about beauty. We can think about we can really have positive associations with disability.
Yes.
And I am, on a mission to ensure that we just have a paradigm shift about what it means to embody disability like any other identity.
Is that your purpose? Are you telling me you have found your purpose? Something that so many of us search for, just eternally search for?
Azza, I have found my purpose. I have. I think my purpose is to really be a living manifestation of possibility, to embody possibility. And what that means, it is to use my life as a symbol of what is possible, as a symbol of human ingenuity, human creativity. That is what I'm on this planet to do.
Yes.
So yeah, I found my purpose.
When I first met you, you were on a mission. You had been accepted to Oxford University.
Yeah.
An incredible opportunity for any young person, or anybody, in fact.
Yeah.
And you were raising money to be able to access this bursary, to be there and fulfill this dream.
Yeah.
And there were a number of obstacles along the way, because the acceptance was the acceptance of you
Exactly.
at Oxford and not your 24-hour carer. So in a lot of ways, the world is still not operating from a perspective of universality, of thinking for our entire need.
It's not. And I often say to people with disabilities, younger people with disabilities, that the more barriers I've broken down, the more inaccessibility I experience, because it becomes uncharted territory. And so my journey to Oxford, I attained admission, but because there was no point of reference, there had never been another African with a degenerative disability sort of roaming the streets of Oxford, a 900-year-old institution, and there I was, and I suddenly had to make it work. So you can imagine the sheer, the magnitude of the inaccessibility that I had to navigate.
Yes.
Not having a caregiver, I went through 21 caregivers over a span of 9 months. It was really, really, really challenging, but that's what it means to have a disability. Yes, we break down barriers, but sometimes there's no point of reference.
Yes.
And we have to become the first ones for ourselves.
And agitate that
and
the policy
agitate.
must change.
Exactly, exactly. And the irony is, you know, I was at Oxford reading for a master's in public policy, and yet there I was experiencing the access gap firsthand. So, you know, I won't change the experience. It was a wonderful experience. I'm now an Oxford graduate, so I don't look back, but it certainly, I think, is indicative of how we still have so much to do in the way of access. Yeah.
I want us to go back because this journey didn't start with Oxford. You had, I was describing your dreams as very fierce. Your ambition was to go study at Columbia University.
For my first degree.
Yes, for your
Yes, for my first degree, that was my ambition. I did not get into Columbia, but I ended up studying at Carleton University in Canada, and that was a very serendipitous moment because it turns out that the university I went to happens to be one of very few universities on the planet that cater for people with disabilities in a very meaningful way. So I had access to 24-hour care at Carleton University in Canada in a way that I didn't have at Oxford. So it ended up working out the way that it needed to.
Yes.
And I graduated with high distinction. Let's put that on record.
Exactly, in spite of everything else.
In spite of everything else. So that was, Canada was, those were magical 4 years.
Yes.
And I am the person that I am today because of the academic training and the social experiences and interactions that I had back then.
How did not getting into Columbia affect you?
At the time, it was devastating. You know, I was and still am an overachiever, and so, you know, I really wanted to get into an Ivy League institution. And at the time, it was really, it was hard. You know, I cried a lot. And of course, I then had to think about, okay, what next? What now? This didn't work, but this is not the end of my life. And looking back, I think it needed to happen the way that it has.
You didn't let that depression stop you.
No.
We've got a caller for you, Eddie.
Okay.
We've got Jerome calling from Durban. Good evening, Jerome.
Good evening, yes.
Yes, you can go ahead and welcome to Real Talk. Speak to Eddie.
Yes, Eddie, what I'm realizing now, it's proving my understanding that really no one is disabled. Everybody is able. It's just that we do things differently. So I would like the community, the South African community, to believe that everybody can do things. It's just that we use different methods of doing things.
Okay.
The only disabling, the environment is not conducive for someone to do whatever he or she can do. That's the issue around disability, not the person. It's the environment that is, which I can say is disabled.
Right. Interesting viewpoint there, Jerome. Eddie, what do you think of that, his premise, where he starts this from?
I think that Jerome is right in saying that the way that we structure our society, the way that we structure the built environment is disabling for many people with disability, with disabilities, and so I do agree with him. And what I would say is that disability, like gender, like race, is part of the human condition, and it's a spectrum. As Nikki said earlier, we all fall somewhere along the spectrum of disability and ability. So ability, disability, differently abled, you know, I use all of these terms interchangeably because it's all part of the same kaleidoscope of what it means to be a human being. And so what I think disability offers us is, it is an invitation for us to reimagine capacity. Because here I am with a spinal muscular atrophy, and I have managed to achieve really the extraordinary things. And I'm not the only one. There are so many remarkable disabled people all over the globe living their best lives every single day. So I think that is an invitation to reimagine what it means to be capable.
Talking to you, there are always these quotable moments. You're like, oh, that's such a quote. Let's just file it away and we'll pull it out another day. Like it's such, the quotable moments are just all over the place. But isn't it exhausting, Eddie, to have to fight this society, the structures that we've set up? Isn't it exhausting?
It is exhausting, and it's exhausting because we put the onus on people who bear the brunt of exclusion to have to navigate through this society. It's not a shared responsibility. So when I encounter inaccessibility, encounter ableism, exclusion, the onus is on me to have to try and find my dignity in the midst of that social exclusion, which is a structural issue, right? And so it certainly is. It's very, very exhausting, but I have no choice, right?
Yeah.
For people who experience social exclusion, we have no choice. We need to get up and do it all over again. There's a great song by Andre Day called "Rise Up," and the lyrics are "Rise up, rise again, and I'll do it 1,000 times." And so that's really what my life is.
Giving me goosebumps. Well, there'll be more with Eddie after the break. Do not go anywhere.
Love letter to myself. Isn't it incredible? You have outlived yourself. 20 years ago, medical experts told your mother that due to spinal muscular atrophy, you would not live past your 5th birthday. You feel guilty because you have left folks behind. You have left millions of disabled 20-somethings scattered throughout the global South behind. In some ways, they are like you, young, Black, profoundly disabled, but in many ways, they are not like you. You live a life they can barely imagine. Unlike you, they are locked up in the back rooms of grim nursing homes, made to disappear from public view, and are neglected and ill-treated by society and the state.
He's undoubtedly an inspiration with a lot still planned. Eddie is still with us, and you're welcome to give us a call if you want to chat to him. So, Eddie, you've got some major plans. You didn't just stop with wanting to study at Oxford. You have an ambition of being the first, is it the first African person with a disability? Or is it just first person in the world with a disability to go up in space?
First wheelchair user in space. Yeah, so the goal is to address the UN General Assembly from the edge of the planet as the first wheelchair user in space, and basically give the talk of my life. If I had,
from the International Space Station.
Exactly. To address world leaders and push for concerted action around the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development under the rallying cry of leaving nobody behind.
This notion of leaving people behind, even your poem touched on that.
Yeah.
As you say, you are in a fortunate position that you have a voice. You had an incredibly supportive mom. I still actually want to talk about her, but there's so many that are forgotten and left behind.
Yes, exactly. And my attainment of liberation or my attainment of inclusion is incomplete if I'm not able to bring people along with me. And so I am committed to ensuring that I use my platform and my voice to be able to amplify the voices of people with disabilities across the globe.
Yeah.
And hence the voyage to space, the epic voyage to space. It's really about that.
It is quite epic, and you plan to have it accomplished before the end of this year.
That's the goal. That's the goal. And sort of in keeping, in the spirit of Nelson Mandela's centenary year, there's a quote by Madiba that really resonates with me. He once said that it always seems impossible until it is done.
Yes.
And that is a quote that has resonated with me my entire life. Everything that I've achieved to date has been really the impossible. And so why not take it one step further and deliver a speech to
Yes.
world leaders from space?
And then after that, you want to visit 25 African countries, continue with your advocacy work through your global startup. And then there's an upcoming film, what, Space Art Body as Protest.
Well, the film is linked to the space project. So basically documenting the journey to space, the behind the scenes moments, because you can imagine it's a logistical feat to be able to send the first wheelchair user into space. So of course the dream is to have that documented as well in the form of a feature film and to really share the meaning behind it, because it's not just about going to space. It really is about leveraging that as a symbolic moment, as a snapshot in history.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So clearly you have a platform, you're quite visible, but there probably have been settings when you've been rendered invisible. How do you overcome that? You keep pushing. You keep pushing, and you know, I don't want it to sound as though I'm no longer on the receiving end of invisibility or exclusion, because as I said, the more barriers I break, the more inaccessibility I experience, because there's just there's so much uncharted territory. But we have to demand more. Right? I'm a big believer that there's so much more for all of us that's out there in life. I really, really believe that. It doesn't just end with the ramp. You know, I've said before that the ramp is not enough. It was never enough. We want the whole building. I love that.
And I'm here to take the whole building.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, but I want you to quickly touch on the impact that your mom has had.
I recently said my mom's a rock star. You know, my mom, like so many single mothers out there, she has given me every opportunity to ensure that I'm equal to my able-bodied counterparts. And so I sit in remembrance every single day of the sacrifices and the effort that she's made to ensure that I'm here. So I mean, my mom is everything.
Yes. Well, Eddie, you've got a lot of us walking behind you, supporting you in your endeavors. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Azza.
That was Eddie Ndlovu. When we return, Dr. Pravina Sukraj, and she's made her mark with the justice system as a senior state advocate of the High Court, despite her visual impairment. So keep those calls coming in. We'll see you after this. This is Real Talk.
I was born with partial sight. I could only see with 10% in the left eye. At the age of 12, I lost all my sight after an eye operation and an overseas trip to Mauritius. The aeroplane pressure was very high, which caused my retina to detach, and thereafter I had to adjust to living in the world of the blind.
Well, despite being totally blind and having to face various challenges, she obtained 4 degrees by the age of 30, including a bachelor's in social science, LLB, master's in political science, cum laude, and a PhD in public policy. Absolutely powerful. Dr. Pravina joins us now on the show. Good evening. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for having me on the show.
I'm still astounded, like 4 degrees.
I know, it's quite crazy. I don't know why I did it, but once I did the first one, there was no turning back from doing the second and the third and then the fourth. So,
it just kept going.
Yes.
So let's go back a little bit to your upbringing, because you were partially sighted up until the age of 12. Yes. That must have meant an incredible adjustment for you.
Yes, it was an incredible adjustment, and I just want to also give you a little bit of background. I had to go to a school for the blind, which was situated in Pietermaritzburg, 100 kilometers away from my home, because it was the only school that would accept me. The local mainstream schools would not accept a child that could not see. So therefore, my parents had to send me away to a boarding school at the age of 3.5 to ensure that I actually got an education. So that is how I actually started out. Going away from home, having that, when you're away from home at such a young age,
Yes.
that sense of no family, your family belonging, your sense of you've got low self-esteem, no self-confidence, you're excluded from the rest of society. So automatically you start off on the back foot, not equal as everyone else.
Right.
And thereafter, when I lost all my sight, it clearly meant I had to overcome more challenges in learning, because previously I would write with a pen, read with my eyes, although it was 18 font possibly.
Right.
But I did everything like a sighted person, walk alone, unaided. However, when I lost my sight at the age of 12, I was then forced to learn Braille, walk with a cane, comb my hair without looking at a mirror,
Yes.
polish my shoes without getting all the polish on my hands, swimming, walking, whatever the challenges were endless.
And going through university as well, there were some adaptations that had to be made. There wasn't material available in Braille. Just like we heard with Nikki, like we heard with Eddie as well, a supportive family really is part of the success that you've attained. So your parents would record the textbooks for you.
Yes, definitely. The problem for blind people is we don't have books in accessible formats, whereas anyone else can pick up a book and start reading it. I had to need to think about, firstly, getting the lecturer to please give me the notes.
Yeah.
Secondly, finding someone to photocopy it. Thirdly, trying to find somebody to read it for me. And then my parents, who both of them did not have matrics, both, I think, completed standard 9 in those days. My mom was a nurse and my late dad was a carpet fitter. And both of them would read my university textbooks onto tape for me, because then we had cassettes. And eventually, when I reached my master's, I remember my dad would sit and scan book after book so that it becomes the electronic format, and I could read it. Similarly, my siblings also would do all of the necessaries to assist me.
Yes.
Yes.
But you now work within the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, or you did. A long period of your career was within the department. What is your view on government's efforts, especially to make sure that people living with disabilities have a much more fulfilled and fulfilling experience in our society?
Okay, I'm currently still based at the Department of Justice. Just to say, when I got my 4 degrees, I even got recognized for having my excellent academic performance with the International Honors Golden Key. I had Dean's commendations, I had the Pius Langa Scholarship, I had the Dennis Hurley Scholarship, etc., etc. However, no one in the private sector wanted to employ a blind person. So I therefore went and I served pupillage at the Durban Bar so that I could empower myself to be employed. And luckily thereafter, I was able to get employed at the Department of Justice because there were some clued up people on the interviewing panel. Okay, because very often you end up with interviewing panels that don't understand that persons with disabilities actually can do everything that able-bodied people can do, and sometimes even better.
Yes.
Yes.
So we still continue to discriminate. It's still an uphill battle. We must never ever rest on our laurels and believe that this battle has been won. You're an absolute inspiration. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Wow, we've had quite an inspirational episode, without a doubt. And thank you so much to all my lovely guests for coming in and sharing with us what's been their personal take and their personal experiences. So we continue with the conversation on social media platforms. You can go to @RealTalk on 3 on Twitter. For instance, Mokai says, today's show, I'm so inspired, like wow. Today's show literally taught me how to teach my cousin who is disabled to live with it in happiness without fear and to just embrace who she is. Thank you to all your guests. Well, I'm back again tomorrow. We'll see each other again as I sit down with boardroom powerhouse Phuthi Mahanyele. From myself, Azania, and the Real Talk team, it's good night.
Real Talk is proudly sponsored by Huawei and MTN.